mosquitoes was?
Yes, I started the war flying Wellingtons, in fact, at number 37 Squadron at Feltwell, and then number 99 Squadron at Newmarket, and I did 40 raids, and I went to 15 Operational Training Unit at Harwell, where I was a flying instructor for 2 years, and then suddenly I was posted to number 8 Pathfinder Group onto mosquitoes. I hadn't asked to go onto them, but I was suddenly fortunate enough to be selected to do so. And in those days, no one in Bomber Command was allowed to touch the controls of a mosquito until he'd done 1,000 hours as first pilot and had been selected by somebody or other to fly the things. And so I went to Marham in Norfolk to 1655 Mosquito Training Unit, where I started to fly these wonderful wooden wonders, which I flew, in fact, for the next 4 years.
Okay, and what was the principle behind pathfinding and marking?
Well, for a long time, certainly in my days on Wellingtons, or nights on Wellingtons rather, in 1941, 42 and 43, we found it very difficult to find targets. The trouble being that we had no radar, or nothing to speak of. Certainly at the beginning of the war we had nothing. And all the navigation was done on dead reckoning, and you had to find your target, you hoped, drop flares over the side, look around, try to identify something and bomb it and then come home. And at the beginning of the war, you were not allowed to bomb if you couldn't see a target, and so quite often you would bring bombs home. But from about 1941 onwards, there was no question of ever bringing bombs home from Germany, and so we didn't. But there's always a need to find a way of getting to a target and then marking it for the make-you-learns, if you like. There were experienced pilots who could find targets, but generally speaking it was very difficult. And for the most part, people were very lucky if they could get bombs down within a mile of a target. Well, that's no good at all. If you talk about precision marking, you've got to be on the button. You've got to be able to knock. You've got to be able to put bombs down within 100 yards or so of a target in order to knock it down or blow it up. So there was a need for pathfinding, and of course Donald Bennett, Group Captain Bennett, later Air Vice Marshal, was allowed to start the Pathfinder group, number 8 group, and he started with Lancasters, which were equipped with H2S radar. It was a downward looking radar which looked at the ground over which the aircraft was passing and produced pictures which clever navigators could interpret, and they could find their way to targets, and they could then mark targets. But it was an inexact science, and then a wonderful aid called oboe came up as an electronic aid, and it was fitted onto mosquitoes, and with that a competent mosquito crew could get a marker down from 25,000 feet to within about 10 yards of a target. But the aid was a line of sight aid, and it could only be operated one aircraft every few minutes, and it would take 8 aircraft, I think about 10 minutes to get through a target. So that wasn't good enough, but for pinpoint marking and for pinpoint bombing it was excellent. And the Battle of the Ruhr in 1943 was fought largely on oboe marking. The oboe marker would put down markers, shall we say, on the Krupp works at Essen, which had never really been bombed before. And then the Lancasters would come up and back up the marker flares, and then the main force would come in and bomb, and enormous destruction was wrought on the Ruhr that way. So that's what pathfinding was all about. You had to find targets, and then you had to mark targets, and then the main force, the hundreds coming up behind, could bomb them. That's what it was about.